What if everything your grandparents taught you about surviving in the wilderness wasn't actually about survival at all, but about control? You've probably heard the stories. Your grandfather could start a fire with nothing but 2 sticks. Your grandmother knew which plants would cure any ailment. They could navigate the darkest forest without a compass. These are the legends we grew up with. Tales of unbreakable people who bent nature to their will. But here's what nobody talks about. The reason many of these skills are now restricted or illegal isn't because they're dangerous to you. It's because they were dangerous to the natural world itself. And that's a much more interesting story than anyone's been telling you. See, our grandparents lived in a world where nature felt infinite. The forests stretched beyond the horizon. The fish in the streams seemed endless. There were more trees in North America when they were born than there had ever been. Fresh growth after the logging boom of the 1800s. From their perspective, taking what you needed from the land wasn't just survival, it was your right. It was natural, it was what everyone did. But they didn't realize something crucial. They were the first generation to have access to enough of these skills that their collective actions started to matter. When you're one family, taking bark from a tree doesn't matter. But when thousands of families are all taking bark from trees, entire forests start looking like they've been attacked by beavers on steroids. When your grandfather catches 10 fish, that's dinner. When 10,000 grandfathers each catch 10 fish, the rivers run empty. The illegal wilderness tricks your grandparents swore by fall into 3 surprising categories, and understanding the difference between them changes everything about how you should think about survival, nature, and your relationship to the land. First, there are the tricks that are illegal because they work too well. These are the methods that absolutely devastate ecosystems when scaled up. Your grandfather probably knew how to gig frogs, impale them on a special fork-like spear, and he could catch dozens in a single night. It's efficient, it's effective, and it's now illegal in most places. Why? Because in the 1960s and 70s, when enough people started doing it, frog populations in certain regions collapsed completely. Not just declined, collapsed. We're talking about entire species that used to be so common you couldn't walk near a pond without hearing their chorus. Now they're vanishing. The same thing happened with certain hunting techniques. Spring hunting, waiting in the breeding season when animals are vulnerable and predictable, seems like basic survival logic. If you want meat, hunt when the animals are easy to find. But multiply that by thousands of hunters, all doing it at the same time, and you don't get a population reduction. You get an extinction event. Passenger pigeons used to darken the sky over North America. There were billions of them, literally billions. A single flock could take hours to pass overhead. Within 100 years, they were completely gone. That's not hyperbole. That's what we did. But here's where it gets really interesting. The second category of illegal wilderness tricks includes methods that work fine at small scales, but become dangerous when you change what they're applied to. Your grandmother probably knew how to make medicine from willow bark, salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. She likely knew which mushrooms were edible and which would kill you. These skills are still technically legal in most places. You can absolutely harvest mushrooms or strip willow bark for personal use. What's illegal is commercializing it without permission. What's illegal is taking so much that you damage or kill the tree. And what's illegal, this is the important part, is giving that knowledge away in a way that encourages mass harvesting. The government doesn't want to stop you from making personal medicine. They want to stop 1,000 people from stripping every willow tree in the region because some TikTok video told them it would cure their arthritis. The third and most surprising category, illegal tricks that aren't actually illegal at all. They just feel that way because of how much shame and cultural forgetting surrounds them. Your great-grandparents knew how to live off the land in ways that were actually sustainable. They understood rotation. They understood limits. They knew not to take everything available, to leave some for next season, to spread out their harvesting so one area could recover. This wasn't a moral choice for them. It was practical. You can't survive long-term if you destroy your own food source. But somehow, we've forgotten that this knowledge exists. We've let it become invisible. When you try to teach someone about sustainable wild harvesting today, people assume you're being mystical or spiritual. They assume it's not real knowledge. And that disconnect, that shame, is exactly what allows corporations to clear-cut forests with barely a legal challenge. The real story here, the story that nobody's been telling you, is that our grandparents weren't wrong about wilderness survival. They were just operating in a completely different context than we are. They had access to abundance that our generation will never experience. A single stream in their world might have supported infinite fish catches for a single family. Today, that same stream is supporting thousands of people downstream, all pulling from the same source. The knowledge is still valid. The context is completely different. And here's the thing that changes everything. Understanding why these tricks became illegal isn't about judging your grandparents for what they knew. It's about recognizing that we're in a completely different situation and we need completely different approaches. This is why the most important wilderness survival trick for your generation isn't any of the ones they knew. It's learning to thrive in a world of limits instead of abundance. That sounds abstract, so let me be specific. If your grandfather could live off 1 hectare of land, it was because that hectare was undisturbed except for his harvesting. If you tried the same thing today on the same hectare, you'd find it's already supporting a hiking trail, a water pipe, protected habitat for an endangered species, and carbon offset credits. The land hasn't changed. The context has become incomprehensibly more complex. And the survival tricks that matter now aren't the ones that involve taking more from nature. They're the ones that involve understanding what nature needs and what's actually sustainable within that constraint. Your grandfather knew how to make his environment give him what he needed. Your job, and this is where it gets genuinely interesting, is learning how to help your environment thrive while you're taking what you need from it. These are completely different skill sets. One is extraction, the other is restoration. And that's why the wilderness tricks that matter in 2024 aren't really about tricks at all. They're about reciprocal relationships. If you want to learn foraging, you're not just learning which plants to eat. You're learning which plants have overgrown their native range and need harvesting to control. You're learning which are endangered. You're learning where they grow sustainably and where taking them would damage a fragile ecosystem. If you want to hunt, you're not just learning how to kill something. You're learning about population dynamics, about which animals are actually overabundant in your region, about seasonal restrictions that exist for reasons that are mathematically sound, not arbitrary. This is where it gets genuinely mind-bending. Many of the restrictions on your grandfather's survival tricks aren't actually there to protect humans. They're there because humans finally, collectively, became powerful enough that our survival choices affected whether other species could survive at all. For the first time in human history, being skilled at taking what you need from nature became a threat to ecosystems, and we had to choose. Either develop a new set of skills that operated at the intersection of human needs and ecological health, or watch things die. We chose to develop new skills, and honestly, that's way more interesting than any trick your grandfather ever knew. Because now you're not just learning survival, you're learning stewardship. You're learning to work with nature instead of just taking from it. You're learning to become the kind of human that ecosystems can actually support instead of just survive. But here's the catch, and there's always a catch. Most people don't know these new skills exist, let alone how to learn them. The knowledge is incredibly fragmented. It lives in academic papers that nobody reads, in regional conservation organizations that nobody's heard of, in indigenous communities whose wisdom has been systematically suppressed, and in the personal experience of outdoor professionals who rarely take time to teach. Which is exactly why I've put together a detailed resource that maps out where these new wilderness skills come from, how to find them, and, most importantly, how to practice them in your own region. Because sustainable wilderness survival isn't one size fits all. What works in a temperate forest is completely different from what works in a desert or a coastal zone. The principles are the same, but the application is radically different. I've compiled that into something that goes much deeper into this topic than I can fit in a video, and you'll find it in the description and pinned comment if you want to check it out. The reason this matters, the real reason, is that your generation is going to face wilderness survival challenges that your grandfather couldn't have imagined. Not because nature will be more dangerous, but because nature will be more fragile. You'll need to know how to get what you need, while simultaneously understanding whether taking it would break something you care about. That's not a trick, that's wisdom, and it's something your grandparents couldn't have learned because they lived in a different world. Some people read all this and think it's depressing. Like you're telling me the world is more constrained, more complicated, less abundant? Yes, but that's not the whole story. Because here's what nobody talks about. When you learn to thrive within limits, when you understand the actual mechanisms of an ecosystem, instead of just knowing which plants taste good, you gain something your grandfather never had. You gain the ability to actually help things grow. You gain the ability to be part of the solution instead of just another person extracting resources. And that's a different kind of power. It's not the power to take more. It's the power to enable more. Your grandfather could survive alone in the wilderness. Can you? Probably not. But also, that's not actually what we need anymore. What we need is people who can live in relationship with the wild. People who can take what they need without breaking what they love. People who understand that true survival isn't about dominance. It's about belonging. That's the wilderness survival trick they never teach you in the old manuals. And it's the only one that actually matters anymore. Because here's what nobody tells you about those old wilderness survival tricks. The ones that seem so impossible to regulate, so against the grain of modern society. They weren't actually illegal because people wanted to ruin nature. They became illegal because people finally understood what happened when everyone did them at once. Your great-grandfather could trap as many beavers as he wanted. Your grandfather watched the beaver population collapse. Your father saw the law come down. And you're living in a world where beavers are back, not because people stopped needing them, but because we finally learned that need and conservation could exist in the same breath. This is the thing that shifts your entire perspective. Those illegal practices weren't restrictions imposed on you by distant bureaucrats who hate freedom. They were insurance policies written by people who watch their own world die a little bit every year. But here's where it gets interesting. Because once you understand why these rules exist, you start seeing them differently. You stop seeing them as restrictions. You start seeing them as translations. Your grandfather knew which plants cured which ailments through decades of personal experience and community knowledge passed down through generations. You have that same knowledge available, not through secrecy or rule breaking, but through cultivation, through citizen science, through mycology clubs and herbalism courses, and native plant societies that are growing faster than ever before. The survival trick isn't know which plants are edible. It's build relationships with people who know which plants are edible. It's not snare rabbits illegally. It's understand the ecosystem so well that you can predict where rabbits will be, how many should be harvested, and what the actual carrying capacity of your land is. And yes, this requires more knowledge than just, I've watched my dad do this. But it's knowledge that's actually available to you, right now, today. If you want to understand your local ecosystem at the level your great-grandfather understood his, through necessity, you can. There are restoration ecology guides in the description and pinned comment that will take you way deeper into this. Frameworks for understanding your specific bioregion, your specific plants, your specific soil. The real plot twist is this. You might end up knowing more than your grandfather ever could. Not because you're smarter, but because you're standing on the foundation of a century of ecological science that he never had access to. Your grandfather survived. He lived off the land through skill and intuition and stubbornness. But he also, whether he knew it or not, was living through a period of ecological abundance that had been built on thousands of years of indigenous land management that he probably never learned about or acknowledged. The Karak people, the Karuk people, the countless nations who lived in California for 10,000 years didn't do it by accident. They had sophisticated fire management practices. They cultivated the landscape. They harvested sustainably because they needed it to work for the next generation. And the moment settlers stopped allowing them to do that work, the moment we outlawed their practices, the forests started dying. The biodiversity crashed. The whole system began to collapse. So when you're looking at a law that says, you can't harvest wood from this forest, or you can't hunt in this season, what you're sometimes looking at is actually the residue of colonialism. Rules written by people who didn't understand what they were banning. Rules that should be changed, not necessarily eliminated, but evolved, by listening to the people who spent millennia proving what actually works. This is where the conversation gets uncomfortable for some people, because it means the answer to, how do we survive better in the wild, isn't break more rules. It's learn from the people whose rules we broke, and integrate their knowledge with modern science. Your grandfather's wilderness survival tricks aren't actually dead. They've been transformed. They're not secret anymore. They're academic. They're published. They're debated in journals and tested in the field. and refined by thousands of people, all trying to answer the same question. How do we live here without destroying what we love? And the illegal practices your grandfather committed in 1955 aren't illegal because society hated freedom. They're regulated because society finally understood scarcity. We learned, the hard way, through watching rivers die and forests shrink and species vanish, that abundance isn't infinite. But here's what makes this story actually hopeful instead of depressing. We also learned that restoration works, that ecosystems are resilient if you give them half a chance, that the same places that seemed dead can come roaring back to life. The wilderness survival trick that actually matters now is understanding that you're not surviving against nature. You're surviving with it. You're learning to read it, to move with it, to take what you need in a way that leaves something better for the next person. And that's a completely different skill set than what your grandfather needed. But it's not less, it's more. It asks more of you. It requires more knowledge, more humility, more patience, more community. It asks you to survive better than your grandfather, not by taking more, but by understanding more, by belonging more completely to a place, by being the kind of person who can answer the question, how do we live here, with actions, not just stories. So here's the thing that nobody talks about when they're discussing these old survival tricks. Your grandfather wasn't just surviving. He was participating in a world that was already telling him what to do. The land had rhythms. The seasons had rules. You followed them, or you suffered. It was simple because scarcity made it simple. But we live in the opposite world now. We have abundance, but we've lost the instructions. We have grocery stores instead of hunting grounds. We have water from taps instead of rivers. We have electricity instead of fire. And somehow, we're more lost than we've ever been. The survival skills your grandparents had weren't actually about survival. They were about literacy, land literacy. They could read what the earth was telling them. A plant's leaf shape told them if it was edible. Animal tracks told them where to find water. Cloud formations told them when rain was coming. The night sky told them which direction was north. They weren't memorizing facts. They were fluent in a language most of us have completely forgotten how to speak. And here's what really gets me. We've criminalized that literacy. We've made it illegal because we've decided that every piece of land belongs to someone, that every resource needs permission, that independence from the system is actually a threat to the system. Your grandfather could identify and harvest edible plants anywhere. You do that now in most places, and you're trespassing. You're poaching, you're breaking the law. But you know what the real crime is? It's the loss of knowledge. It's the fact that we've created a world where being self-sufficient is not just discouraged. It's become practically impossible for most people. We've built a system that requires you to be dependent, and then we've made independence illegal so you can't escape that dependence even if you wanted to. So what's the actual survival skill you need now? It's not bushcraft. It's not foraging. It's not building shelter from branches and leaves. It's something much harder. It's the skill of remembering that you're part of a larger ecosystem. It's learning to see the intelligence in systems that aren't human. It's developing enough local knowledge to make decisions that benefit not just you, but the place where you live. That might mean learning which native plants support the pollinators in your region. It might mean understanding the hydrology of your local watershed so you know where water actually comes from. It might mean knowing the fire ecology of your landscape so you can participate in restoration instead of always being afraid of fire. It might mean learning the migration patterns of birds, or the breeding cycles of amphibians, or the way invasive species are transforming your local ecosystem. This is the work that's actually available to you, not the work your grandfather did, not the work that's been made illegal, but the work that matters right now, in this moment, in this particular crisis we're all living through. Now, if you want to go deeper into this, and I mean really deep, into practical ways you can start developing this kind of literacy in your own place, I've put together a full resource guide in the description and pinned comment that walks through exactly where to start, how to connect with local ecological restoration groups, and how to build these skills even if you're living in a city. Because here's what I've realized through talking to people who actually do this work. It's not elitist. It's not something you need a degree to understand. You just need curiosity. You need the willingness to spend time in a place. You need to ask questions and pay attention to the answers. Your grandfather had to know these things to survive. You get to learn them because you choose to. And that choice, that intention, actually makes you better at it. It makes you more thoughtful. It makes you less extractive and more reciprocal. It makes you someone who contributes to the ecosystem instead of just taking from it. The old survival tricks were about you against nature. The new ones are about you as part of nature. And the fact that we've made that illegal, that's not a reflection of how dangerous it is. It's a reflection of how powerful it would be if everyone remembered. So if you're ready to start remembering, if you're ready to become fluent in the language of your place, you'll find everything you need to get started in the description and the pinned comment. There are organizations, resources, field guides, and communities ready to help you. All you have to do is decide that it matters. I want to thank you so much for watching all the way through this 3-part exploration. If this perspective shifted something in how you think about survival, about nature, about your relationship to the place where you live, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And make sure to ring that notification bell, because we've got some deep dives coming about rewilding, ecosystem restoration, and how communities are actually changing their relationship to land right now. Thanks for exploring this with me, and I'll see you in the next one.